The winter sea was black and breathless on the night of January 25th, 1917. Off the jagged north coast of Ireland, the liner SS Laurentic pushed through sleet and blown snow, her decks rimed with ice and her funnels breathing low and steady. In peacetime, she had carried emigrants and honeymooners under the White Star Line's colors, salon lights warm against the Atlantic night. War had stripped the ship of glamour and painted her in dull gray. Guns crouched where deck chairs had once faced the sun. The crew knew they were sailing through a field of ghosts. German U-boats had sown mines across the routes in and out of Irish harbors, and the winter darkness hid everything that floated just below the skin of the sea. Captain Reginald Norton kept his speed high and his lights trimmed. He threaded Laurentic through Lough Swilly, using the coast for cover, trying to outrun both ambush and rumor. Snow thickened, turning the shoreline to a smudge. Men on watch stamped their feet and beat their gloved hands. Twilight had barely surrendered when the first shock arrived. A metal roar rose from the starboard bow and threw men from their feet. Steam screamed through ruptured pipes. Before orders could settle into action, the second blast struck farther aft, a blunt, gutting punch that opened the ship like a hand tearing cloth. 2 mines, laid and waiting, had found their mark. Water hurried in, merciless and heavy, chasing the light down corridors, as bulkheads groaned and doors burst like ribs. The Laurentic heeled. Norton's voice carried along the decks. Abandoned ship. Sailors ran to falls and gripes made treacherous by ice. Boats slapped the black water. Some swung and smashed against the plates, spilling men. Others splashed cleanly and began to drift in a snowfall so thick the sea and sky became one. The cold made victims before the waves did. Faces went blue on the oars. Fingers lost feeling, then strength. Oil spread in ugly rainbows, and the snow came down through it like ashes. Within an hour, the liner was gone. Lights out, boilers drowned, the sea closing over a roar that dwindled to hiss and silence. Out of nearly 480 aboard, more than 350 would die, many within sight of the dark shore. Some were found later, still seated in lifeboats, heads bowed as if asleep. Those pulled from the water spoke of time narrowing to a tunnel, the sound of their breath in the helmet of the night, the taste of salt and smoke, the way the stars slid and were swallowed. The Admiralty counted the dead and kept its counsel. The newspapers reported a loss. The cargo's particulars remained a whisper. But the gold could not stay where it lay. Every bar corresponded to a contract and to a hope. The naval salvage section was ordered to raise it, and quickly. The wreck rested in about 120 feet of winter water off Fanad Head, deep enough to punish, shallow enough to tempt. Divers were chosen for toughness, men willing to drop into cold black water and work by touch. They wore what that era allowed: canvas suits stiff as tents, brass helmets that rang when set on shoulders, lead-soled boots that bit the deck. Lines fed air down into the helmets and fed the men's signals back to the surface. A mistake meant the sea arrived everywhere at once, through a broken glass, a torn seam, a fouled line. Even descending was a negotiation with darkness. Lamps drew small moons in the water. Silt rose at a touch and hung like smoke. Iron creaked and shifted in slow complaint. Finding the strong rooms took time, memory, and nerve. The mines had torn great wounds in the ship, but the vaults were built to keep storms and thieves at bay. Thick doors, thick walls, locked bars. Divers worked cold minutes at a time, chiseling and wedging before the first whisper of yellow showed in a beam. A bar of gold weighs more than it looks like it should. Each one was cradled, bagged, and sent up the shot line by sling, greeted by mittened hands and the sharp scribble of a tallyman's pencil. The weather argued. Gales paused the work for days. When the sea calmed, the teams dropped again, learning the ship by touch. The way from the break in the side plate to the watertight door, the turn past a collapsed companionway, the pocket of air that thumped a helmet like a knock from inside a coffin. They learned the moods of currents and the way fatigue speaks in the voice of impatience. More than one man surfaced shaking and silent, teeth chattering against metal. The first season brought up enough gold to prove the task was not impossible. The next seasons became a devotion. From 1917 into the early 1920s, crews returned, spring through autumn, hauling fortune against gravity and story. Newspapers finally said what everyone guessed. There had been treasure, and it was coming home in drab naval launches under canvas tarps. A handful of bars went missing in rumor, as gold always does. Caught in a trawl, traded in a back room, seen gleaming in a cottage window. Most of it came up the hard way, bar by bar, lift by lift, wet hands passing history into daylight. None of the numbers touched the families who kept photographs by lamps and listened for boots that would not climb their steps. Along the Donegal coast, the sea is part of every conversation. Fishermen gave the wreck a quiet berth, as if disturbing it might bring up something more than silt. On calm days you could stand on the headlands and imagine the shape of a ship in the map of the swells, your mind tracing rails and davits under the skin of the ocean. The Laurentic became not only a story of money and war, but a local prayer for fine weather and an untroubled tide. Years thinned the wreck. Plates buckled, decks folded, and the spaces divers once swam became rust lace. By 1924, the Admiralty declared the work effectively complete. A few bars remained unaccounted for, perhaps buried beneath fallen steel, perhaps carried deeper into the hull. Treasure hunters would visit with new torches and newer air, hoping for a glint. The sea gives and withholds. She does not negotiate. What cannot be recovered is the hour after the explosions, when men measured their lives in breath and grip. Survivors remembered the feel of an oar swelling with ice beneath their hands, the way speech slowed into slur, the faces of shipmates turning away into snow as if walking into another room. One petty officer said the cold was a thief with perfect manners. It asked for his fingers, then his toes, then his thoughts, and he found himself willing to hand them over. He lived because a fisherman's lantern found his boat and would not let it drift into dark. Stand on Fanad Head with the wind in your coat and the gulls crying like torn paper. The Atlantic holds its counsel, but it remembers. Down there the Laurentic lies broken in the posture of a fallen animal, her wealth long since tallied, her dead long since named. Nations measured her in bullion. Families measured her in letters that stopped coming. The divers measured her in minutes, in hose length, in the beating of their own hearts. A wreck is a kind of equation. Metal plus time equals ghost. Money plus risk equals story. The Laurentic solved itself before witnesses and left behind a remainder you can feel, but not spend. Britain found its gold again and turned it into shells, fuel, and wages. The ocean kept what it always keeps: the silence, the cold, and the last things men said to one another as the boats went down into the dark. In museums, the recovered bars sit behind glass, dull as river stones, until light wakes their buried fire. Divers who handled them said the metal felt warmer than the water, as if memory could hold a temperature. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.